Welcome, Dr. Noguera. A pleasure to have you with us at Orange Coast Community College for your presentation today for the CLEEO 11.0 Summit. We look forward to your insight and research regarding equity and deeper learning in community colleges. And with that, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. And it's such a pleasure and a privilege to be with all of you. I only wish that this were in person so I could see your faces and not by Zoom, but Zoom works. I've done enough of these now to know we can communicate this way effectively. And I hope that this is going to be something that will be beneficial to the college and to you as faculty and students there. In between when Eric and I talked, I made some changes in the area of kind of the emphasis of my presentation. And as you can see, the title is now The Power of Education. And I want to explain why I frame it that way. Education, you just heard Eric give you my background. And, you know, I've had a very, distinguished academic career. And, you know, I could tell myself very fortunate to do work that I love and care about. And I continue to feel passionate about that work every day. And I'll tell you more about the stuff I'm doing that gives me a reason for hope and gives me a reason to be excited to get out of bed every morning and go to work, now that I do go to work in person. But what you should really know is that I'm the son of immigrants. Both of my parents are my father from Latin America, from Venezuela, my mother from Jamaica. I was born in New York. Neither of my parents graduated from high school. We grew up in Brooklyn, New York, in the housing projects, in a part of Brooklyn that still hasn't gentrified, called Brownsville, better known for producing boxers like Mike Tyson and rappers like Biggie Small. And, you know, we didn't have a lot growing up. We didn't have toys. I was trying to explain to my kids, we didn't have toys growing up. We used to make our toys from stuff we found, right? And we used to play all kinds of dangerous games that my parents knew nothing about, right? That they wouldn't have been happy about. And, but I lived and I have experienced the power of education. And I bet you there are lots of other people on this call today who have lived it too, right? My father, who, as I said, did not have a high school diploma, used to tell us, he said, you can get a free education with a library card. And he practiced it. He was an avid reader. And because he had been a merchant seaman, he traveled the world. And he could speak 8 languages, though mostly toast in 8 languages because he liked to drink. Right? But he was a person who learned from life, learned from books, and he imparted that onto us, right? So they used to make us, our parents used to make us go to the library on Saturdays after we did our chores. And I became an avid reader at the age of 8 because of a Panamanian librarian who took the time to talk to me, find out what I was interested in, and then recommended a book. Book she recommended was A Wrinkle in Time. I would have never read that book because I didn't like science fiction, but I trusted her and I fell in love with it. And I was back a week later and said, okay, what else do you have? Imagine what would happen to our students now if they were independent, avid readers. How far that would take them just from reading books. Because my father was right. You can't get a free education with a library card. How many people practice it? How many people even know it? Here's what we know about the power of education. You want to lift the poverty of a nation? You want to reduce poverty? Educate the women. The World Bank knows it. Educating women and girls reduces poverty. Why? Because when women are educated, they're the first teacher in any household. They educate the children. Children learn language from their mother first, usually. They learn about life. They learn about so many things. So if you're educating a woman, you're educating the children too, at least initially. You want to reduce recidivism, the likelihood that a person who's been incarcerated will return. Educate the inmates. Educate the incarcerated. Who do we incarcerate? Those we fail to educate disproportionately. What would happen if we turned our prisons into colleges, into places where you could get job training and mental health care if you needed it? Wow. It would transform society. Education could be powerful. In fact, education is so powerful that slave masters made it illegal to teach the enslaved Africans to read and write because they knew an educated person is hard to enslave. Because with education, you could do like Nat Turner or Denmark Vesey and flip the teaching of the Bible and say, you know what? The Bible is not about being passive, being submissive. It is about seeking liberation and following the words of Jesus. So they said, no, it's a crime to teach an enslaved person to read and write. So over and over again, we have examples of education being powerful. My question to you as a college is, do you understand the power? Do we see the power and the potential of our students? So I want to start there because I think that if we did, we might approach our work differently. Let me say that community colleges are facing a lot of difficulty right now. Because although we have resources more than ever before, we're losing students. We're losing students because a lot of students, especially young men, are choosing to work instead of go back to school or not coming. And as enrollment declines, funds will go away. And so again, given the enormity of challenges facing our students, because their lives are challenging, and we know there are a lot of people choosing between work and education. What do we do to respond? The challenges are economic uncertainty. They're also the fact that many of our students have basic social needs that they can't ignore. Food, housing, childcare, transportation, you name it, they got it. And if you have to choose between survival and education, many people choose survival. And it's not an irrational choice. It's not an irrational choice, right? Abraham Maslow called it the hierarchy of human needs. The base of the hierarchy is the need everyone has for food, for shelter, for security, and for love. You look at the students who are not thriving on our college campuses, what do we see? The students with the greatest needs are the ones we're losing. And the needs go beyond the physical. They also include the psychological, the emotional needs. You know, we have students, think about those who've served in the military, come back dealing with PTSD. Think about those who live in communities exposed to violence, who are dealing not with post-traumatic trauma, but with ongoing trauma from the violence that they have witnessed, that they have experienced directly. If education does not instill a sense of hope in those we educate, it doesn't work. The power of education is not realized. You know, as a brand new teacher, I was teaching in Providence, Rhode Island. And I went to, I went to college at Ivy League school, Brown University. But I chose to become a teacher because I wanted to do something practical. I wanted to do something that I felt could make a difference. And I was asked to teach at Central High School, which was considered the worst high school in the city. And I get there, and my mentor teacher tells me, your job, you can teach American history. Your job is to get the kids from the Revolutionary War in September to the Vietnam War in June. That's your job. Here's the book. I'll be in the back watching. I said, what about the Constitution? How much time do we play on the Constitution? He said, oh, no, don't get caught up in the Constitution, because you got to be at the Civil War by Christmas. Constitution is too complicated. I said, well, the Civil War is really complicated. He said, no, you don't get it. You got to be at the Great Depression by Easter. Then I got it. He didn't care if the kids actually learned history. He was more concerned that I just covered the book. Right? He's one of those teachers that confuse teaching with talking. They're not the same. Now, fortunately for me, he wasn't in the back watching. He was off drinking coffee most of the time. So that meant when the classroom door closed, I had the power. I said, wow, they gave a 21-year-old this much power? Well, I knew what to do at 21 with that power. I said, I love history. I'm going to get them to love history too. How am I going to do that? I'm going to make history come to life. I'm going to make history matter. So I would bring in friends from a college. I'd say, come tomorrow dressed as Thomas Jefferson. Kids could be ready because I told them about you. And they were ready for Thomas Jefferson. I said, okay, how old was Sally Hemings when you first started having children with her? What was it like to own a person while you were advocating for freedom and justice against the English? When you present history in a way that matters, that connects to the life of our students, guess what? They embrace it. They don't see it as boring and lifeless. I'll come back to this because the power of teaching, the power of pedagogy comes from us seeing it first. If we don't see it, how can we expect them to see it? Let me say that part of what we have to do is understand what kind of education is needed. Because it's not simply about going to school. A lot of us know people who went to school and they're what my father called an educated fool. How many of you know educated fools? People who have degrees, but they don't have what we call common sense. Common sense is not that common. Common sense is about knowing how to make the right decisions with your life, about who to avoid and who to embrace. If our students don't learn how to live, then how good is the education they received? And so part of what we have to do is ask ourselves, if we're going to provide an education that is empowering, that can be transformative, then we got to practice with an equity framework. Now, equity is confusing to a lot of folks. Some people confuse it with equality, sounds like equality. And so this diagram helps to show the difference. If you're not focused on providing access, then treating everybody the same means some people are left out. Think about what happened during the pandemic. The students who didn't have internet at home, how could they participate in learning? Or who were working off their phones instead of a laptop? Or who jammed up in a small apartment with lots of other people so they couldn't hear, they couldn't concentrate. All those forms of inequity require us to figure out how do we scaffold, how do we mitigate the effects of inequity? And inequity is pervasive. It's pervasive in this country. That's the reason why those who have the most get the most. That's the reason why education in America tends to reproduce inequality rather than expand opportunity. What's the strongest predictor of how well kids will do in school? Family income, number one. Family income, when combined with parent education, predicts how well students will do. So yeah, we like to celebrate, individuals who come from poor backgrounds who are able to use their education to get far. But guess what? We're the exceptions. How many of you know people who had talent, ability, worked hard, and are still broke, still stuck? Because what they lack is opportunity. That's why equity work is about eliminating barriers. The barriers that prevent our students from learning, from thriving, from growing, from using education to improve their lives. So I want you to think for a moment about your students. What are the barriers they face? What gets in the way? What stops them, despite their dreams, from using education to change things, to improve things? Because when we do the work of eliminating the barriers, then we can see change in the lives of our students. Because it's not just about access. It's about more than that. It's about using education to change lives. And as I said, we know this from the research. When you read the story of Malcolm X, you read the story of Nelson Mandela, you read the story of Perry Thomas, down these mean streets, Puerto Rican growing up in New York in El Barrio. He describes how prison became his university, where he learned, where he read, where he came to love himself for the first time. Now, many of us know that doesn't always happen. Malcolm X got his education in prison. It happens for some when they have the mindset to use the time to transform, to take advantage of what's there. When I was visiting Robben Island is the maximum security prison off of Cape Town, where Nelson Mandela and several of the leaders of the African National Congress were held. Mandela was held there for over 20 years, 7 years in solitary confinement. I was given a tour of the prison by a former inmate, man who served time with Mandela. He showed me the cell where Mandela slept with no mattress on a cement floor. He said, they created this prison to destroy us. It became known as our university. I said, how did that happen? He said, because people like Mandela was an attorney before he went to prison. Mandela and Tambo and others were educating the other inmates. Mandela was so smart, he got the guards to become their allies, to bring in information, to bring in books. I thought to myself, man, if you could turn a prison into a place that is grooming the next leaders of the nation, what could we do in our colleges right now? Where there isn't confinement, where we don't have to sleep on the floor or do hard labor. Part of it is being able to see the possibilities. So I want to encourage you to think about how you see your students. One of the questions I hear asked often is, they say, our students aren't ready for college. I say, are we ready for them? Because if we're not, if we can't meet them where they are, we're in trouble. It's true, many of them come in lacking the kind of skills needed to do college level work. But we have a law now that says in California, no more remediation in math. No more. because that just left them stuck, taking courses for which they didn't get credit, not making progress. And so now they're going to be in college level courses. What are we going to do? We can't keep approaching it the way we did before, because that just breeds more failure. We have to realize that there's a difference between academic performance and intellectual ability and potential. Many of our students are low skilled, but not unintelligent. They have life experience. They have street smarts in some cases. How do we tap into what they know to teach them the things they need to know? I want you to think about that for a moment, because I think part of the problem is that in many cases, we haven't provided those who teach our students with the guidance on how to do this well. And I think what we often fall back on is students aren't ready. It's the student's fault. We blame. Blame is not a strategy for doing this work. Now, I was going to show a video, but it's going to be too hard for me to flip over to YouTube to show you this. But I want you to think for a moment about how our students learn when they're not with us. You know, most of our students now, the younger ones, are digital natives. They know more about these cell phones than the adults do. They navigate, you watch them text, they're so fast. My 9-year-old daughter, she's showing me things I never knew possible. How do we tap into what they know to teach them now? And it's not just about technology, because part of what we also know is we have to develop and help them develop those higher order thinking skills, the ability to think critically, the ability to use knowledge to solve problems that they face in their lives, that their communities face, that our society faces, the world faces. Now, here's the problem. This video I was going to show reminds us that many of our kids, excuse me, now I shouldn't say kids, many of our students went to school at a time when standardized testing determined lots of things. And what that taught many of our students is that the goal of education is to find the least wrong answer, right? To do well on tests, not to think deeply, write, problem solve, critique, create. That means that we have work cut out for us, because we've got to tap into that potential that's there. You can't tap into it if you don't know them, don't understand them. What motivates your students? And what are the obstacles they face? What's it going to take to empower them as learners so they take control of their lives and their education? That's the fundamental question that we have to address if we're going to unleash the power of education. So I want to present two individuals who had very different theories of motivation. The guy on the right, Roland Fryer. He's an economist at Harvard University. A few years ago, he got a bunch of money from the Broad Foundation and others to try an experiment. His theory was people will do better in school if you pay them. So he literally got money to pay kids to go to school, to read books, pay them if they got higher test scores. They tried this for 2 years in 5 different cities. At the end of 2 years, they announced the experiment was a failure. No evidence that monetary incentives worked to get higher performance. Now, the same day that they announced the failure of the experiment on this, and there was a New York Times front page article, that was also the day they announced the death of Jaime Escalante. And those of you who are from LA, especially East LA, know the legend of Jaime Escalante. And if you want to know more about it, go to Garfield High. There's a mural up about him and his work, because it's a true story. Watch Stand Deliver. That's the Edward James Olmos version of the story. Escalante was a Bolivian immigrant, engineer, who gave up engineering to become a teacher at Garfield. And when he gets to Garfield, he's assigned to be a math teacher. But all he's teaching is remedial math. So he goes back to his department chair and says, this is a waste of time. We're not preparing these kids for anything with these math courses. And they say, well, this is the curriculum. He said, well, these kids should learn calculus. Calculus is the key to better jobs, better life. And they laugh at him and say, these kids can't learn calculus. He said, oh yeah, watch me. So he starts teaching calculus. He doesn't just teach calculus. He has kids coming in on Saturdays, coming in the summer. And then he has them take the advanced placement exam. And 19 of his students, all 19, passed the exam. So of course they assumed he must have cheated. So they required the students to be retested, and they pass again. And he did that several years in a row. In fact, he did that for over 20 years. And the numbers grew and grew and grew to over 80 students by the end, were a year taking his math classes. So eventually they sent in researchers to study, well, what is this Escalante doing? How is he getting such great results? And they were sending researchers from Berkeley, from UCLA, to come and study him, and they all came back and said the same thing. They said, all we see is math. No magic in here. Because they didn't understand what he called ganas. He was cultivating ganas in his students. He was cultivating the drive, the hunger to learn, to want it. He challenged his students. He provoked his students. How do you get students who hate school to come in on a Saturday? I met one of his former students. She's the only Latina engineer at Boeing. Two of us were together at Hawkins High School in South Central on a Saturday with robotics, teaching kids robotics. And she was out there getting in it with the kids. And she said, you know, everything you hear about Escalante was true. That's why I'm an engineer today, because I stuck with him. He got me to believe. She said, he even used to come to my soccer games. I said, he came to your games? She said, yeah, but not to tell me, encourage me. He told me, I stink at soccer, go back to math. And I'm so glad I did. That's why I'm an engineer today. And that's why I'm here for these kids, because I know that they could be engineers too. When he died, at his funeral, great outpouring of former students, many of them, all kids from East LA who are now doctors, lawyers, professionals of all kinds, because of one teacher who had a very different theory of motivation. What's your theory of motivation? One of the things we know is that we've got to have cultural competence. We need cultural competence in this work because culture is the medium through which we learn, through which we make sense of the world. Cultural competence is really just the ability to work effectively as a professional across race, class, linguistic, and cultural differences. And I would add age. And sometimes age can be as much a barrier as any of these other things because we see things differently than the younger generation. It's the ability to establish trust and rapport based on relationships that are premised on respect and empathy. Empathy is not pity. Empathy is telling a person, I understand what you're dealing with, but I know you can do it. We need people in our colleges, and when I say people, I mean faculty, I mean staff, advisors, counselors, who have the linguistic and the cultural skills to be that bridge for our students. When that happens, great things are possible. So I want to encourage you to think about, what are you doing to pursue equity in your classrooms? To do it, you have to have the right framework. You have to have the right sense of understanding that, first of all human beings can learn, but we need a holistic approach, because intellectual ability is related to psychological well-being, emotional well-being, physical well-being. It's all connected. How many of you could get your work done if you had a baby crying all night? Or if you didn't have a good night's rest? Or you were hungry? We have students that face these kinds of challenges. And while we as individuals may not be able to solve them, as colleges, we can do a lot. I know that because I've worked with Skyline Community College in the Bay, and they have a food pantry. They have a whole array of counseling services. They allow students, they find places for students who are homeless to either sleep in their cars on campus or to work with them to find temporary shelter. That goes so far beyond what a traditional college does, but they have to, because they understand if they're gonna serve their students well, they're gonna have to meet them where they are. The neuroscience has really shifted the way we think about learning now. Learning is not about depositing information into a person's head. It's not about sorting students so that we see who has the math gene and who doesn't, who's smart and who's not. The neuroscience is showing us that everybody needs to be stimulated, to be challenged, that when we make connections, then humans can learn all kinds of new things, because the brain is like a muscle. It has to be worked. The term they used is neuroplasticity. It's like working that muscle. Think about it. If you haven't worked out in a while, the first time you go to work out, it's hard, isn't it? Because you haven't used those muscles. That's what some of our students have not had to think hard in a long time. Haven't read a book since they were last made to in middle school. So yeah, they may resist it at first. That's why we have to tap into their motivation, their dreams. And we have to make what we offer compelling, challenging, stimulating. Because when we do, they're more likely to become willing learners. Lastly, we got to recognize that human beings learn through relationships. All of us can, I bet you in your career, at one point, you could say, that teacher made a difference for me. Who are the teachers that got through to you? Who are the teachers that got you to learn something that you thought you couldn't do? What does it say about the power of relationships? How are we building those relationships with our students now? We don't teach subjects, we teach people. And when we build relationships, sometimes that requires being vulnerable ourselves and letting them know about your journey, the obstacles you faced. When we open up in those ways, then we can open up the world of learning. And I'm not gonna say that it just happens overnight or it happens for everybody at the same time. It doesn't. But it can happen a lot more if we have a concerted effort as a faculty to do this work together. So we want to create a culture of learning. We want to get to know our students. We want to know, what are their academic needs? Where are the gaps in learning? How can we address those? Very hard to do more advanced work if you don't have the foundation. We need to know what's the cultural frame of reference? How do they learn things? How do they make sense of things? How can I teach them in ways that make what I'm offering intelligible, interesting? What are their learning styles? How do they learn things best? You know, some people don't learn through lecture, by sitting and listening people talk at it. No. Some people learn better by movement, by applying what they're doing, by using multiple forms of media. If we're not incorporating a variety of teaching modalities and learning experiences, then we're only going to reach the students who learn the way we teach. And then, what are the challenges that students face? And I don't think we can work miracles with this, but we have to organize ourselves to address these needs. And you know, there are many colleges now that are working at this. It's not going to happen overnight, but it's a shift we have to make. As Eric said at the beginning, deeper learning is essential to this work. And the reason why there's a growing attention to this issue is because too often we have assumed that people with low academic performance not capable of deeper learning. Not true. Those higher order thinking skills are accessible to all of us. In fact, they're even accessible to children. You watch kids, what's the most common question you've ever heard from a 3-year-old? They want to know why. Why is the sky blue? Why does the moon come out at night? Why do I have to eat my vegetables? What will happen if I don't? That natural curiosity, if it's encouraged, can lead to young people becoming independent learners. It can happen with adults too. It's harder because too many of them have learned helplessness. Too many of them have learned to avoid the books, to avoid things that are hard. And so we've got to pull them back, reclaim them as learners. Remind them, how many of your students are translanguaging? Constantly. They're using more than one language. That's you know what we know now about people who are able to use more than one language? Their brain is working differently in more complex ways. And so when we understand that our students have this innate ability, then we've got to give them the ability to apply it, to learn through complex tasks and texts that challenge them to think. You know, one of my students right now, he's working with formerly incarcerated youth at Homeboy Industries in East LA, and they're reading Paulo Freire together. Pedagogy Depressed. Many of these are young people who dropped out of school. And anybody who's read Freire knows it's dense. It's not easy. You got to take your time with each sentence. And they take their time with each sentence. And together they translate it, understand it. And the more they learn, the more they want to learn. Because good teaching is like good cooking. Right? How do you know someone's a good cook? Tastes good, doesn't it? And it's good for you. And you want more. How do you know someone's a good teacher? Usually because it shows up in the learning of the students. And so we got to make sure that our students are acquiring the skills they're going to need to be successful in life. And not be confused by their transcripts, their academic records. So I want to encourage you to teach with the focus on learning. How do your students learn? How do we make the standards that we have explicit to them? Do we model for them what we're expecting? Do we show them what high quality work looks like? So they understand what they're aiming for, why the work they turned in may not be good enough. Do we check in with them to make sure they understand what's been expected of them? That we're clear in our expectations? Do we create a safe learning environment? So it's okay to make a mistake. It's okay to ask a dumb question. That's important, isn't it? It's important to give them numerous opportunities to revise and resubmit the work. Because the real learning is not in the first submission, it's in the revision. And sometimes you have to revise over and over again. When I'm writing, I revise over and over again. And I've been doing it for a long time. I don't get it perfect the first time. The real teaching is not in the grading, it's in the feedback. Helping that student understand why what they did the first time is not good enough, where they can make corrections, where they can make improvements. We've got to be the guide that helps them, first of all, understand the importance of what they're doing, but also show them how to do it in ways that demonstrate mastery. So when we focus on the learning, we become better teachers because we're reflecting on our practice. And reflective practitioners are not afraid of looking at the student work, the work their students produce, and saying, what do I need to do to change the quality of what my students are doing? When we own it that way, then we're going to start teaching differently. Research shows students will learn the least through lecture. They retain the least. They learn the most by doing. And if they really learned it, then they can teach someone else what they've learned. Again, this is why we need to try different methods in our teaching, because we need to incorporate different learning styles and strategies to get them up this pyramid that we call Bloom's taxonomy. I'm talking too long, so I promised Eric I would stop, giving you time for discussion. So let me start to wrap up. These are just some of the skills that employers are looking for, which is why the higher order thinking, the deeper learning is so important. You'll get a copy of this, so don't worry about taking notes. This is a school in the Bronx, in the South Bronx, I've worked with very closely. All these kids in this picture, recent immigrants, got to this country not speaking a word of English. They graduate 5, 6 years, it takes them longer. Not only speaking English, but having passed exams in math and science in English. I asked the students, why is a school like this so successful? You know what they told me? They said, because it's like a family. We look out for each other. We take care of each other. I talked to the teachers. What's special about this school? I said, what's special is that we work together to meet the needs of our students. No teacher delivers a lesson that hasn't been vetted and critiqued by their peers. It's a collective undertaking. And so when we treat it that way, when we get our students engaged behaviorally, cognitively, and emotionally, learning is more powerful and education becomes more powerful. So again, I want to encourage you to remember the power you have. Education has been a tool of oppression. Look at the history of the boarding schools where they were taking Native American children, indigenous children, kidnapping them from their homes and putting them into schools to turn them into something else, whitewash them, take their language. You know what we're finding out now? The only way to counter many of the social problems we see on the reservations, whether it be alcoholism or drug use or dropping out, is by reviving the language and the culture, by offering an education that empowers them. So we have the work, the research that shows us how to do this. My challenge to you at the college is to do the work in the way that can truly make a difference. That work is important. That work is the only hope we have in many ways for a better future. So I'll stop there and open it up to some questions. Thank you. So here's one. It says, as a student, how do you hold teachers, professors accountable? Almost all my classes consist of lectures and are very rarely aimed at truly engaging the student. You know, I wouldn't say that rather than thinking about accountability, because that's the way we've approached it and it's failed. I would say we want to give guidance to show them another way, right? Because a lot of people, you know, the easiest way to teach is just stand up and talk. When you start doing simulations, debates, project-based learning, other things, that requires more creativity, but it's mixed teaching and learning, much more interesting, much more gratifying. So we need to show folks how to do this, give them a lot of support and feedback rather than approaching it in a punitive way, I think.